Happy Monday, writers. Welcome back to our Jumpstart. As I mentioned last week, we're doing a little bit something different and getting advice from a top copywriter and mentor, Marcella Allison. Marcella has worked closely with AWAI for the last 2 years. And after an interview with her, she had such great insights we had to share. So last week, she talked about what gets her through tough times. And this week, we're going to tackle the topic of fear. Let's hear what she has to say.
How do you still deal with fear, or do you grapple with it, or any advice for people that?
Oh my God, all the time. All the time. The fear is never going to go away. That's the bad news. The fear is never going to go away. You're going to have to learn how to manage it. I just had a fascinating conversation with a man named Nick Grease, who's a paragliding instructor. He's like an extreme sport athlete for our mastermind on
Him and I could never be friends. Side note, but carry
this is for our mastermind on fear that's going to be in March. And anyway, he said something to me that was really interesting. He said the fear is what gets in the way of flow. So some of you may know about flow states, right? That moment when you're writing and everything else drops away, and 2 hours could pass and you don't even realize it. Like we used to say in the zone, right? And he said, what happens is fear takes you out of that flow state. And he had a couple of really interesting. So I was like, well, how do you do that when you're paragliding, right? Like, what do you do? And he said, I picture a moment of joy. And he goes, and I attach it to an object, right? So I have a memory of like pure joy. And I have some talisman, right, that I can bring up, that I can imagine, that I can touch on, because fear takes you out of your body, out of the flow state, right? Your heart, we've all heard fight or flight or freeze, right? I'm a freeze person, right? So for him, he's like, I have to replace that with a memory of joy, with something that will ground me, right? I think that helps. The other thing is all the stuff you guys have learned, like breaking it down, right? The huge thing seems terrifying, but what's the tiny thing that you could do? Sometimes it's just, okay, why don't I open a Word doc and name it? The name of the project. Maybe that's all I can do, right? I'm not ready to write yet, but maybe I can open it and name it. I think that for me, fear definitely makes me so anxious. It makes my thoughts spin so that I can't actually write. He's right. Like he can't fly a plane in fear, and I can't write, because you lose the ability to focus on the moment because you're so busy trying to write.
Yes.
So sometimes it's physical for me. I have to go for a walk. When we did,
which is slow again, if you think about it, right? Because you're getting the movement. Yeah.
And for me, walking really helps with writing, right? It's that iambic pentameter that the poets knew about. So moving helps me get out of fear. There was something else that Nick said that, breathing. Every extreme athlete I've talked to talks about breathing. And we had this great interview when I was running my company, the Mentoress Collective, with Colonel Deb Lewis, who's one of the highest ranking women in the military. I mean, I think she was like building bridges while being bombed. Like that was her job, right? It was just crazy. And she also said breathing, right? Breathing is the number one tool that she used in combat to not drop into fear. Breathing. Yeah. So learnings, and there's tons of apps. There's stuff on the internet. I mean, there's
YouTube
like
channels.
Right. You'll find a bazillion hits in 10 minutes. But learning, because if you notice, the more fearful you are, your breath starts, right? And there's some great books. One is called Mastering Creative Anxiety. There's a whole bunch specifically for creatives around fear and anxiety that offer a lot of these tools and techniques. So for me, part of it is physical. I have to learn to walk, to get up, to move. Part of it is breathing. Part of it is journaling. I used to keep a separate journal that was just sort of like my wild thoughts when I was going through a project, so I could just get it out of my head and on the paper. That has helped me a lot. Having a check-in buddy is great. Jen Adams and I used to just, when our lives were crazy, right? We used to laugh like it was a hotline, right? Just send each other a text. She'd be like, oh my God, my son has now, taken apart the toilet paper roll in the bathroom, flushed 60 feet of it down the toilet. The plumber's on the way. There's water pouring from my ceiling. And by the way, I have a video sales letter due tomorrow morning, right? And we would just like having someone to just vent and process with can also help a lot.
Love it. So there's another person who, Marcella, I've got to find where I wrote what he said, who I think you will be obsessed with. And I think we need to get on another call because you'll be obsessed with him and we need to just talk about him. And his name is Dr. Phil Stutz, Stutz. And Jonah Hill, the actor, he was his psychologist or psychiatrist. And so he made a documentary on him because unlike a lot of psychologists, he actually...
Oh, I saw that. It's on Netflix now.
Yes.
It's on Netflix. Yes.
He wrote the rules and gave his clients actual tools in order to overcome certain things, right? And so he said he said that true confidence comes from living in uncertainty. So true confidence comes from living in... You have to be okay with living in uncertainty, okay? And then he said... if we're going to level up or do anything more with our lives than what we have right now, okay, what we're going to encounter is pain, fear, and work. You're going to feel a little pain. You're going to feel a little fear, and you got to work. You got to work, right? And he said, without those things, we're never going to move up. But he also talks about so much of what you're saying, Marcella, that it's like different layers of like how to be better just mentally, and his main one is movement. And he's like, it's the most cliche thing, it's the one everybody knows, but it's very difficult to practice. It's like to peel yourself away and to like go on that walk or to make that movement or to do that thing, right? So I think for everyone listening, like just if you can find the way that it fits into your life and not what works for everybody else, like Marcella talks about how much is on the internet. I learned like a 10 or 15 minute yoga or Pilates that I can do on my floor over here in my pajamas is the thing that works for me as a mom in the morning, right?
Yeah, right.
Versus when I have the time, then I go to the gym, but not to put that pressure on myself of doing that hour thing a day, just like 10 minutes, right? And it doesn't even need to be every day. I feel good if I've done that 3 to 4 times a week, just because I'm like, you moved.
Yes.
You did the thing,
I was thinking something else around fear, which is one of my coaches, Bo Eason, talks about this. And this is also comes from The Power of Myth. This is sort of like this epic thing and ties back to Elise talking about your business being your experiment for your personal growth. If you think of what you're doing as almost the Arthurian quest, right? We're all going after the Holy Grail. Whatever your Holy Grail is, we are all, like you said, we're making a change. We're stepping out. We're doing something risky, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing that Bo brings up and that we talk about a lot is that the first thing that happens is, I call them the guardians at the gate, are going to show up. Yes. So you're going to say, I'm going to run a marathon. And the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to step off the curb and twist your ankle.
100%.
Guaranteed, right? Because the universe, as soon as you, and it isn't even woo, it just happens. As soon as you say, I'm going after this grail, the universe goes, really?
Yeah. Let's see if you really want this.
Let's see how bad you want this, right?
Great.
So they're going to bring it, right? And the guardians at the gate are there to sort of say, how bad, how bad, how bad. And you have to get past them to keep going on your journey. And it's going to show up a million different ways based, like I said, the classic is, I'm going to run a marathon and I turn my ankle the next day stepping off of a curb, right? So if you go into it knowing that, then you don't see those things as, I know I was stupid to do that. Why did I even think I could run it? Like, you can go into this whole negative self-talk when those 100%. Things go up, right? But if you go into it with, oh, that's one of those guardians at the gate, Marcella. It's going to happen. That's one. That's one of my hurdles, right? That I'm going to have to overcome. And Bo had a great exercise, which I loved. You had to imagine that you had achieved it. So you're at the end of the quest. I ran my marathon in, I don't know, 4 minutes or whatever the heck it was, right?
On the other side.
I'm on the other side. He goes, now you're going to write a letter back to yourself like, darn, that was a bitch. My language, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to actually imagine every one of those guardians at the gate, and you're going to write to yourself as if you overcome them. So you're going to say, so this memoir, right? That's my goal. I'm going to write this memoir this year. So I'm going to imagine that I'm at the end and I've written it, and let's just go for broke and say it's a New York Times bestseller. All right, there we go. Now the letter is going to say, holy mackerel, what a ride. I can't believe that you lost the whole first draft, all 2,486 pages when you dropped your candle on your laptop keyboard and the wax melted into it. But boy, you didn't give up. You took your notes and you started over. Like, go through and imagine all the worst case scenario in your mind. Then imagine that you went through it and you write that letter to yourself, congratulating yourself.
Yeah.
Because again, that makes you change your perspective that these things coming at you are a test. And here's the other thing. Sometimes you realize you had the wrong goal.
100%.
Sometimes that third guardian of the gate shows up and you go, I really don't want it that way.
I don't want this. No, I said to be a real estate agent, Marcella. Right. I was so desperate to get out of what I did. I was like going for everything, right?
Right.
And one of them was a real estate agent, and I did even the hard stuff, and I took the tests, and I went to all the night classes, and it structured my whole, like, everything around it. And then I got the license, and then the part of when you actually had to like join a firm or actually that piece of it, I was like, I don't actually really want to do this. So yes.
Did you hear that, guys? Let's take a breath. This is not a pass-fail scenario. So for this week, I want you to do the exercise that Marcella mentioned. I want you to imagine yourself having achieved everything that you're trying to achieve. Write it down, and then you're also going to include all the hurdles that you had to overcome in order to achieve that goal. Next week, we're going to talk about the information or the advice that Marcella wishes that she could have told herself at the beginning of her career, but now she's going to impart that knowledge on you. So we will see you then. Bye, everybody.